But right now, kicking us off, a really interesting session. So I'd like to invite to the stage Mr. Charlie Crowe, founder and chairman of the Festival of Media, and Mr. Steve King, global CEO, Publicis Media.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. King. How are you? Welcome.
Nice to meet you, Charlie.
Nice to meet you, Stephen. Do come up. Hi, morning, everybody. We have a little fireside chat to start the day here at the Julius stage, so make yourself comfortable. We have 20 minutes of conversation with the new big cheese within Publicis Media, Mr. Steve King. Please give him a round of applause. And the fact that we're all here at this relatively early stage of the morning, because many of us were in the bar till 2 a.m., maybe 3. I'm not going to admit that. The fact that you're here, I think, points to the fact that we're all quite curious as to how the new Publicis is going to look, how it's going to operate, and what are the issues, and to hear some of the thoughts on trends, concerns, opportunities within the marketplace. Steve, thank you very much.
Bit of a one-sided chat so far.
Yeah, hold on. Hold on, I'm getting there. Steve.
That's enough of you.
Now let's talk more about you. You're, obviously the Zenith days, the Zenith forecasts are very much associated to the agency and the business. So let's start a little bit with your kind of the macro theme. You reckon, your business reckons that we're going to see 4.6% growth in ad spend this year? Do you think that, given all the uncertainty in the world, that's still the target we should be expecting?
Yeah, I think, as you know, for 25 years, the Zenith brand, took a position in terms of doing these ad forecasts, and they tend to be pretty highly regarded. And I think when you have a period, generally what happens when there's a period of huge decline, like 2007-8, we underestimate the rate of decline, and when there's a period of steep growth, you tend to underestimate the greater growth, because there's the accelerated movement out of down or up is far more accelerated. Right now, I think we're in a period of low growth, quite clearly, economically, and yet our media sector is growing quite robustly. And we certainly see that this year, as everybody knows. You don't need me to tell you. You've got this quadrennial effect. You've got the US elections, you've got the World Cup, you've got the Olympics, and they have disparate
How much is that going to benefit the business by the industry? What's the uptake?
Well, I think it depends on the particular venue you're looking at. I think the Olympics and the soccer, I think they're probably accounting for about 4 billion of additional spend. That's generally what we see. I think there's some question marks perhaps over the Olympics this year, with what's happening with Brazil in the economy, and some tainted perceptions of some of the sports, and the time zone it's in is not so great, particularly for the European and Eastern viewers. The big interesting thing is what's happening with the US elections. Yeah. And I remember being at Davos in January, and I met the publisher of Forbes, and she was saying to me, there's a story here that Donald Trump is going to, we think, and they've done all this modelling, we think he's going to win the candidacy for the Republican Party. I said, that's unimaginable. That's not going to happen. And she said, that is going to be the biggest story of the year. And that's what's happened, obviously. And you've got this incredible news story. So I think both the spending behind that we've seen today, and the spending that's going to come through, but also, as we're in the media business, the actual amount of written word that's been written about. On one side of the pond, you've obviously got the US election, and every single, those of you working in the US, every single US broadcast, every single newspaper leads with nothing else between Clinton and Saunders and where Trump and what's going to happen and the disaffection with big government. It's such a huge story and is driving circulation, and actually, so although I would say that's probably, we would think 2.5 billion. In terms of additional ad spend, quite considerable, particularly in terms of local media, local cable, local newspaper, etc.
So $6 billion of surge this year, which is good for the industry.
Yes.
Where does most of that? You mentioned cable, but what benefits the most with this? Is it digital spend? Is it mobile spend, or is it traditional cable TV?
I think we see that across all venues, all vehicles. It's the spend is probably going to be skewed far more towards the US this year, just simply because the venue of the timing, obviously, of the Olympics and also the US election.
And where do you stand on, I mean, more uncertainty, we're here in Rome, but we're talking about Brexit a lot.
Yeah.
Again, that's something that felt rather like Trump. It felt unimaginable that the UK would contemplate Brexit, and the polls are beginning to suggest that, again, it's the unimaginable is possible.
Yeah.
What implications?
It's as unlikely as Donald Trump becoming candidate.
And it's amazing that's happening.
Yeah.
So what's, in your opinion, what's the potential impact on our industry of Brexit?
Yeah, certainly I think for those of us working in Europe and particularly in the UK, I think the biggest cloud right now on spending, which is definitely somewhat depressed in the minds of consumers across everything from property to retail to finance, is definitely the threat of Brexit. The polls seem to be leaning sort of 55% in staying. But there's a very worrying trend. There's this disparity, as everyone knows, between the young who feel that they should be part of Europe and the older mindset who feel that separation would perhaps be a good thing.
Yes.
And unfortunately, getting the young to vote is going to be a big issue. So I'm a little skeptical on the polls. But we're doing some research at the moment amongst our key clients. I am yet to find a client, a major client, who believes that Brexit will be anything other than damaging for them, their business, their stakeholders, and their employees. Not one major advertiser. We've done some initial forecasts, I think you may know. And we estimate over the next 10 to 15 years, if Brexit happens, there'll be something like £1 billion worth of potential ad revenue coming out of our market. So it's going to be very damaging, we think, for our ad market in the UK.
What, that's 15, 20%?
Yeah. Well, $1 billion over that
time.
period, yeah. And
Right, okay.
so clearly, this Brexit vote, which, ironically, it's not as everyone knows, it's not a dispute between the two parties. It's an internal dispute, really, in the Conservative Party.
Yeah, of course, exactly.
The opposition is actually in favour of staying. So you'd say, well, how is it even questionable? So it's having this. I'm sure Cameron, if he had his time again, either thought that he would be able to negotiate better
with his own party
clauses with the EU and avoid the referendum.
Yeah. So look, back to ad spend. One thing that came out very strongly in the most recent forecast of yours is that internet spend is now ahead globally of spend on television for the first time. That's next year.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. What's and how does that change, the overall focus of the industry, really?
Yeah. Well, I think it's as everyone has seen, in our little journey since Zenith which we may come back to, was the first of these media agencies. When we started, it was a purely executional business. Zenith was called Zenith Media Buying Services Limited. We never have any aspirations to do anything other than media buying, and it was all analog media. And of course, what we've now seen is a number of things are changing our business model quite dramatically. And the arrival, really, over the last 10 years, if you think I know that, 10 years ago in Venice, there was, even then, there was a question, would digital and internet change our business model? Do you remember that? It was coming up in one or two, and there was quite a mixed debate on that. Yeah. And it unquestionably has changed that, and it's changed, it's changed all of the media vehicles and venues. It's changed the competitive mindset. It's changed the role that we play for clients. And it's obviously the most impactful view is on the printed media, where you've seen newspapers and magazines, where we see that sort of broadly what's happened, the shift that's gone into the internet has not been at the expense of TV, which its share of viewing, share of audience time, and share of money really hasn't changed that dramatically. And in fact, share of TV is actually slightly increasing. It's coming out of the printed world, newspapers and magazines, which we see within a couple of years going to 10 and 5. So sort of almost a third of the level that they were 5 years ago.
I mean, we all know that this presents a challenge for the media agency. A good question to perhaps try and uncover some of the issues is, how much of a threat to your business is Google?
I don't think Google's a threat. When we those of us who've been, in our journey, and I remember when we launched Viva Key, 8 years ago, I remember, the analysts all say, the biggest threat we had is disintermediation, because it was going to come from companies like Google and Facebook who are going to disintermediate our business. We certainly have some huge competitive threats in our industry, but I don't think it's coming from Google.
Okay.
Google
Where
is
do
a
you think it's
partner
coming?
and a distributor
Right.
and a provider of content and a gatekeeper to consumers, and obviously now is a technology partner and a data partner, as is Facebook. So we definitely have to use Google. The fact that they are so dominant, Facebook and Google, is obviously a challenge, because obviously in a market, quite often you like disaggregated markets that you can deal with. And the dominant position, if you take Baidu, Facebook and Google have, taking 60% of all digital spend, is very, very dominant position, a position I think is going to grow, not weaken. So, but that's not a challenge to our business, it's a challenge to our business model about how we better serve the connections with the customers. But Google and Facebook has, frankly, has been an amplifier and accelerator for those sitting in the media agencies.
In terms of, however, some of these walled gardens that own vast amounts of data, and they own it. It's not even the advertisers or the agencies. Again, that presents, and some of these companies can match their data, the knowledge of the consumer, with creative services and application of creativity. So in that context, surely that is a potential threat to the traditional agency model.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the changes you have, you could say it's a change to the agency model. I think if you'd have said 10 years ago, this is where the industry is, how will the media agency react? And fortunately, this is a media conference, and I think everyone should be really emboldened that the media agency is entrepreneurial, it's scrappy, and it's adaptable. And I think most people would not argue with the point that the media agencies adapted to the new environment far better than some of the legacy creative agencies. I hear this so much from clients, that the opportunity for us to serve a much bigger role, sitting at the centre, everyone knows this, where we sit now with clients, we sit at that centre of not just in terms of their executional partner, which we still do, but we sit there at the epicentre being the independent, neutral consultant advising clients about which is the partner to use and how should we leverage the technology and data tools of people like Google and Facebook. And we found ourselves in an extremely privileged position. And, when I was looking back 10 years, our business, the headcount, just in terms of headcount, has gone up 2.5 times since we were together in Venice. Now, obviously, some of that you might say, is all of that organic? It's not, because acquisitions, but that is because our parent company, Publicis, has wanted to invest. They've seen the opportunity in growing a well-resourced media organization. So, the answer is that these challenges that come up, right now, I am more optimistic than our business, and that's why we've gone through this huge transformation to make sure we are leveraging a better share of that.
We'll talk a little bit about the specifics of the new structure of Publicis, because I'm very interested to find out more. But you mentioned something about the neutrality of the advice you give clients. Do you think that the media agencies have cracked that yet? Do you think that you have convinced clients, and your peers have convinced clients, of the true neutrality of your offering?
Yes, I think so. I can only talk for the clients that I see. And it's an interesting statistic that globally last year, 94% of our clients did not review. So when you think of that, that would seem to be in any service business, that is a pretty overwhelming sort of sense of satisfaction. And I have been to see in my old role and in my new role, many of our top clients, and obviously there's many challenges they have. How we can play a role in making an effective connection with this consumer with all of these new data points coming into our marketplace. But the neutrality of our recommendations has not been raised by a single one of those clients that I've seen.
Okay. Obviously you're coming off the back of a large amount of churn. There's been some great successes in the Coty and City and so on, Etihad, but obviously some major losses within your organisation, Coca-Cola, P&G, big one. What impact has that had on the business? And second question, do you think there are too many pitches? Do you think clients are too quick to pitch? What's your attitude to this at the moment?
Well, it depends on whether they're our clients' pitches or other people's. Different answer. What was the first question?
How hard did it hit you to lose P&G and Coke?
Look, our business, our business is cyclical, and doesn't matter whether you're running a local market organisation. And, sure, over my 25, 30 years, I've lost a lot of clients, and the pain of losing a client is far greater than the enjoyment and satisfaction you get in winning a client. It's obviously extremely distressing. But, I think if you look at our business, we've seen how agencies have been challenges, and you and I would have privately said, "Oh, this agency has had its day," and you can see there's a tenacity in the media environment and a robustness. I suspect last year, including the units you're talking about that lost some of the biggest clients, were larger than they were at the start of the year in terms of headcount, and I guarantee you they'll be larger at the end of this year. Certainly Publicis Media will be, much to the chagrin of Maurice Levy, will have more headcount at the end of this year than we would have had last year. And that's because the scope of work we're doing for clients is leaving. That's the bigger story, rather than some clients, and we all know why, some clients go through, they get through, they have huge economic challenges themselves. These tend to be the clients that tend to review more often. Quite often there's a domination in terms of the effect of procurement, and in a competitive environment, a new entrant into that can offer often.
So you don't worry that there's
significantly lower pricing.
Yeah, well, you don't worry that there's sort of a race to the bottom here, because you sometimes sees these pitches go on, and there's a spiral, and the agencies are just coming in lower and undercutting and lower, and it's a pricing, and at the end of the day, we're an industry that wants to build some value.
Yeah. Sure, there's plenty of instances where I've sat in my office complaining about competitor X. Oh, they're making crazy bids, they're never going to deliver this. But I don't want to look at the glass half full, but I think that is becoming less relevant. I think people are far more cognizant of what is deliverable and believable, and I think you stand by your reputation. I can tell you, we were never going to commit to something unless we can deliver it, absolutely, because you're only as good as your reputation. So actually, we were here 2 years ago, that race to the bottom, I think, was far more endemic than it is today. The clients today need to find a way of connecting the data and analytics, technology, consumer insight in a really compelling way. Right. That is the dominating view of the clients. Now, obviously, we have procurement whose role is to try and get those services as cost effectively as possible. But there are some reviews that are price orientated, but they are absolutely in the minority today.
Okay. So let's go a little bit to the restructure. I think people are very interested in this. I mean, we were told by Maurice Levy that there would be sort of clarity, and now you've set up 4 networks. How does that all work?
You're talking about the Publicis group transformation.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, our story was that last September we had a meeting in San Francisco, the senior management, and at the time the economy was not great. We were in the middle of the media palooza, and we all got together and we had a lot of external speakers, and it was a very cathartic exercise, and we had 1 or 2 clients who came to talk to us, and I actually envisaged that out of that it wouldn't lead to the type of transformational change that we've done. Publicis this year is 90 years old, and yet over the period from September to the end of the year, the directoire, the management group of Publicis, we said we are really going to reinvent this business, and we're going to reinvent it in such a radical way, and we are going to pivot it around clients. We're going to have clients sitting at the center of the organization, and we're going to simplify this business. You think of the assets that sit inside a holding company. You think inside of ours. We've got Sapient doing high-end transformational consulting. We've got 3 out of the 4 global leading digital agencies. We had 2 of the powerhouse 1 and 3 in terms of the media networks. We got econometrics, we got data, we got customer journey experts. We've probably thousands of data scientists. And yet we've built all these specialist skills, and we have a view that we'd made that too inaccessible and too complicated for clients. So broadly, we've sat our key clients at the center of this, and we've then tried to simplify this business by having 4 solution hubs, not 4 networks. So we've got Artur Sadoun, who's running the communications business, all of the creative agencies. We've got the healthcare businesses run by Nick Colucci. We've got Alan Herrick, who's running the P.S, which is the consulting and digital agencies. And then for reasons best known to himself, Maurice has asked me to take on the media agencies. But the reason to do that is to try and create the fluidity and integration, interdependence on behalf of our clients. We've been doing this since the beginning of the year. It's the biggest transformation any holding company has ever done. Those of us, some of my colleagues from the media world, from Publicis Media are here, and we are going through the biggest, most accelerated transformation in what we're doing.
And what would you say
the
the point
media
of
side.
difference is between the agency you're representing and the competition? You've gone on record saying it's hard to get a credit card between all of these different agencies. What does everyone stand for in the marketplace? So what do you think?
Sorry, are you
Publicis
asking
stands
about Publicis Group or Publicis Media?
for? Media?
Okay, Publicis Media. If you think about the journey, I think everybody knows, I was there at the beginning of the birth of this industry at Zenith Media. We were the first mover advantage. We were the first, and it was everyone thought that was terrific. The reality is everybody allowed our competitors to come in and create a very differentiated business model. The advantage we've got now is we've got what I've said a number of times is last mover advantage. It's allowed us to think about how we can build something. So what are clients interested today about how we can knit together data analytics and technology? How can we do this in an entirely transparent and trusted way? So we're able to build something for today, not something we built for 4 or 5 years ago. I know some of our competitors have got business models that they perhaps would not think are as relevant, as compelling today as when they built them 4 or 5 years ago, the pressure on clients. So we are putting together, we've only been on this journey for about 70 days, but I think you've seen some of the changes we've made. We've effectively retired the 3 holding companies, SMG, ZO, and Viva Key. We've got a single Publicis Media organization. We've created just 4 global brands. We've sort of effectively had 6, and these are powered by 7 global practices. Right. It's a very different business model than our competitors. I'm definitely not going to sit here and say it's better than any of the others, but I can tell you it has a relevancy and attractivity that clients certainly understand.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're being really pushed for time, and Birgit will kill me. And it's good having German ladies running rooms because particularly. But I think we owe it to ourselves to have a couple of questions before we wrap up, if that's okay. We're okay. Do we have some really interesting themes and issues have come out of this discussion? I'm sure you have some questions. Yes. Could you say, please, your name, where you're from, before you fire away? Thank you.
Sure. James Dix, Wedbush. Just looking across the world, do you think there are markets where digital is pulling from television as opposed to print? And I'm in particular interested in your view of the U.S. market. And then if you think that is happening in some markets, are there any indicia in those markets which you point to as drivers of that, like maybe higher than average share of e-commerce or something like that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think, if we look economically, we always used to look at what we call the fast-growing emerging markets. What we see today is the really emerging market is the US, absolutely dominant in terms of the contribution. US and China growth is absolutely the lion's share. The markets where we were looking at growth, South Africa, Russia, Brazil, these are markets now which have their local economic and political issues. So our sort of focus of where that growth is coming from has changed. That's point 1. Point 2, absolutely, what we're seeing in lots of the nascent markets, digital really changing behavior, that whole move from desktop to mobile, and I've recently seen in Africa, for example, how the adoption of mobile payments, financial payments, happening via mobile is happening at a rate which is completely ahead of anything that's happening in Europe. So I think there are customer and business behaviors being driven in these markets, and we're seeing the development and the creation of CRM markets which are moving at light speed ahead of the more traditional markets like the ones we sit in here.
Do you see yourself potentially as an e-commerce company?
Certainly within Publicis Group, we are being asked to build more holistic solution, and you can't do that without CRM at the center of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to allow one more for fear of reprisals from my team. Thank you. Well, you were first. You were sprung up there like a coiled spring. Thank you. So you get the final question.
I think you're going to have to, as Jan's one of our largest clients, I think we're going to have to allow Jan the question as well.
Oh, listen to that. We might let you
I didn't get where I am today without serving our clients, Jan.
Make sure it's a really difficult question.
Yeah, if it's difficult, we'll run out of time.
Hello, I'm Tanya Zwicky. I'm Procter & Gamble, also one of your largest clients.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Delighted to
I
make time
knew
for
that.
Jen
I was
as
just
well.
kidding.
Is this a plant? Is this a plant?
The move to one Publicis sometimes feels a little bit like Back to the Future. We went from big creative agencies, spun off media, now this kind of feels like the pendulum swinging again. We've talked a ton about content in the last 48 hours, and one of the things they say is we got to create content that works across all distribution. You mentioned that you guys are going to be the faithful, neutral consultants that will give us the right keys of where we should act. How are you also modernizing the Publicis creative agencies to make sure they're developing content that can activate what you think we should do?
Yeah. So, very, very big question to ask. But I think, and you as a client will hopefully see, rather than being specific, I think you will have seen some of the change that's happened over the last 100 days. Your global CMO, Mark, was one of the clients that came to speak to us in San Francisco. And, his direction in terms of simplifying the story and creating more fluidity. And I think in the creative world, I think a very specific example is what we've seen is we were operating too much in creative silos. You would have a brand and you would go to that creative team and you would sit for them to try and innovate and ideate a right solution. I think what we're trying to do now is to actually make it far more open source so that you as a client, you have a business challenge. How can we make that more open? And the way that we've done that is to break down the barriers, remove the P&Ls, so you have access to the best creatives, not sectionalized by their previous P&L and geographical responsibilities. And I hope that within P&G you're seeing some of that. And certainly within the media organization, I think we've got about 8 different brands that we're serving content. One of my colleagues, Belinda Rowe, we've given her the responsibilities of creating a single content practice to make sure at scale we can deliver dynamic content either through scaled products or scaled practices. So I think this integration of content through the media agencies, which is something I don't think we have done at scale in the past, or by giving far more fluidity through the creative agencies, making it open source, I think is something that's happening in parallel.
Would you use a legacy creative agency to produce dynamic content? Or are there other better methods? Really?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question? Because no one's looking at me, so we do. Jan, we have the CMO of Aviva. So
I'd rather put you on the spot here, Jan, haven't I?
Hello, yes, hello everybody. Gosh, I've never been so trailed before asking a question. We were delighted to reappoint you, Steve. The comment I would make is that when we did our review, it was absolutely a strategic review. Cost is always an element. We're all commercial people, but it's very, very important who our partners are. What I'm interested in is the whole area of the flow of data between us and the commercial partnership that we now have with our media agencies, which is quite extraordinary. What your own view is about how entwined we are actually going to become as partners, because we all learn to put in silos, earned, paid, and what's the other one?
Earned.
Earned, thank you. That's why I can never remember it, 'cause it's the earned one. It's almost as we've had a siloed mentality even to those buckets, and actually we're trying to have a totally integrated approach. It seems to me it has implications for integration and entwining of our teams as well as our data in a way that we've never seen.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Jan. I think, if you think about the Aviva pitch, which I guess first happened about 7 years ago, and I think it's a very good example about how the challenges we had in this statutory review, how the sort of scope of work and what we do were unimaginable 7 years ago, and about how we use data and analytics very much to drive much more effective connections with your consumers, very much more about addressable media based on the utilization of data, and of course where we get that data from, how we store that data, how you share data, and all of the legal regulations that we need to be careful. Obviously we understand that we're in a position of huge trust from you, because if that data is not used extremely carefully on your behalf by us, it could do far more damage than just disrupting the sort of execution of media plans and buys. So I think this is a new area, and as you know, this is an area that we're putting great store on, which is why probably one of the most important practices we've got that we're scaling is our data and analytics practice.
Do you think that means that clients are going to spend, on average, longer with the media agencies going forward, rather than changing every 3 years? It might become a more of a stable industry, because there's more links and partnerships between
Given that
clients.
I've already said that 94% of our clients didn't review, there's a presumption and an assumption there that the clients are already longer than 3 years. There are some clients that review every 3 years, but I would suggest most of those are predominantly interested in the executional side rather than the strategic embedment that we're doing. Okay. And I do think our business, I would have refuted people saying to us, oh, you're becoming like a consultative business. I do, and my view has changed, and I can see that we're becoming a strategic partner sitting with the clients who are moving into that same space as the consultative agencies. Okay. Why? Just to give you a little plug, which is why Publicis Group, having acquired Sapient, is going to be such an important amplifier and access to talent for us.
Okay, good. Look, I've stretched it for as long as I could. If you have other questions for Steve, he's here for you, here for the rest of the day, aren't you? Or at least for another couple of hours?
Another couple of minutes, yeah.
A couple of minutes, he'll be here. He'll be here. Don't worry, he's like this all the time. So if you please ask questions in the corridor of Steve King. But ladies and gentlemen, please thank for his time. Steve King, CEO of Publicis Media. Thank you, mate. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.